Welcome to a deep dive,
Mm.
into the world of Immanuel Kant.
Go for
Now,
it.
Kant was this 18th century
Mm.
philosopher who tackled some really big questions,
Yeah.
like how we understand the world, how do we make moral choices, and even how we experience beauty. You sent over a bunch of articles about him, and honestly, even I was a little intimidated at first.
Mm.
But let me tell you, once you break it down, his ideas are not just fascinating, they're surprisingly relevant to how we live today.
Yeah. What's so interesting about Kant is that even though he was writing centuries ago, he was grappling with questions that we still wrestle with today. Questions like, what can we truly know? And how should we act in the world? These really fundamental questions.
So
Mm.
let's jump right in. One of the first things that really struck me was this idea that we don't actually experience reality directly.
Right.
Like what?
It's like we're all wearing these invisible tinted glasses. Kant argued that our minds aren't just passively receiving information about the world, but actively shaping it.
Mm.
We have these built-in categories of understanding like space and time that filter and organize our perceptions.
So what I see isn't necessarily what you see.
Exactly. What we experience, what Kant called phenomena, is our own mind's interpretation of the raw data of reality.
Hmm.
Think about it this way. You and I could be looking at the same apple, but our individual experiences of that apple are going to be influenced by all sorts of things, like our past experiences, our cultural backgrounds, even our moods at that moment.
Oh, so there's this whole other real reality out there, what Kant called noumena, that we can't ever fully access.
Precisely. It's a bit mind-boggling, I know.
Yeah.
And it raises all sorts of questions about objectivity and truth. If we're all stuck in our own little perceptual bubbles, how can we ever be sure that we're seeing the world accurately?
This totally explains why people can have such different interpretations of the same event, even arguing about facts. I mean, if we're all operating with these tinted glasses, then those glasses are going to color our perception of everything right.
Absolutely. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? It makes you realize that even our most strongly held beliefs might just be products of our own individual way of seeing the world.
Okay, so if we can't fully grasp the real reality out there, how do we even begin to figure out what's right and wrong? I mean, where do ethics come into play in this Kantian world?
Well, that brings us to one of Kant's most famous ideas, the categorical imperative. This was his attempt to establish a universal moral law, a kind of guiding principle for ethical decision-making.
All right, give it to me straight. What's the categorical imperative all about?
In a nutshell, the categorical imperative says act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Basically, before you act, you should ask yourself, would I be okay with everyone else acting the same way in this situation?
Okay, they actually make sense. So like if I'm thinking about lying to get out of a jam, I should consider what would happen if everyone lied all the time.
Right.
And chaos would ensue.
Exactly.
Trust would completely break down and society would basically fall apart. So lying, even a little white lie, is wrong because it couldn't be universalized.
You got it. The categorical imperative forces us to think beyond our own immediate self-interest and consider the broader implications of our actions.
So it's not just about what I want in the moment, but about acting in a way that respects the inherent dignity of everyone involved.
Exactly. And that leads us to another crucial aspect of Kant's ethics, the idea that we should always treat people as ends in themselves and never merely as means to an end. Basically, don't use people. Respect their inherent worth as rational beings.
So it's like, even if I think lying would help me get ahead at work,
Uh-huh.
the categorical imperative would say it's wrong because I'm essentially using the person I'm lying to as a tool for my own advancement. I'm
Yeah.
not respecting them as a person with their own goals and values.
You're getting it. And this idea, this emphasis on treating people as ends in themselves has had a profound impact on modern ethical thinking, particularly in areas like human rights.
It's pretty amazing that a philosopher writing centuries ago could have such a lasting impact on how we think about morality today. So we've covered how our minds shape our perception of reality and how to act ethically, but I'm guessing Kant had more to say about the human experience, right?
Oh, absolutely. Let's talk about what Kant had to say about freedom, because he has some pretty radical ideas about what it truly means to be free.
Okay, freedom. When I think of freedom, I think of like doing whatever I want, whenever I want. No rules, no restrictions. Am I on the right track here?
Well, not quite. You see, Kant had a very specific, and some might say counterintuitive view of freedom. He argued that true freedom isn't about simply following your desires or whims, but about acting in accordance with reason and moral principles.
Wait, hold on. So you're telling me that following rules actually makes me more free? That doesn't sound very freeing to me.
I know it might sound strange at first, but bear with me. Think about it this way. If you're constantly giving in to every impulse, every craving, every fleeting desire, are you really in control of your own life? Or are you just being controlled by external forces and your own base instincts?
Okay, I'm starting to see what you mean. It's like if I'm always reaching for that extra cookie or scrolling endlessly through social media, even when I know I should be doing something else, am I really free? Or am I just a slave to my cravings and distractions?
Exactly. For Kant, true freedom comes from using our reason to figure out what's right, what's good, what's moral, and then acting accordingly, even when it's hard. It's about rising above those immediate desires and making choices that align with our higher selves, our rational selves.
So it's less about instant gratification and more about self-mastery.
Right.
Interesting. So does that mean like never indulging in a little guilty pleasure, never eating a whole pint of ice cream because it just feels so good in the moment?
No, it's not about denying all our desires or living a life devoid of pleasure. It's about balance. It's
Mhm.
about recognizing that true freedom comes from aligning our actions with our rational moral selves. It's about making choices that reflect our values and principles, even when those choices require discipline and self-control.
Okay, I think I'm starting to wrap my head around this Kantian idea of freedom.
Yeah.
It's definitely challenging, but there's something appealing about it too. It's like, yeah, I can give in to every whim and impulse, but is that really what I want my life to be about? Or do I want to strive for something higher?
Exactly. It's about taking responsibility for our choices and actions and recognizing that true freedom comes from aligning our actions with our values. It's about recognizing that we're not just reacting to the world around us, but actively shaping it with our choices.
So we've talked about how our minds shape our reality,
Yeah.
how to make ethical choices, and this really interesting take on what it means to be free. What else did Kant have to say about the human experience?
Well, Kant was also deeply interested in beauty and aesthetics. He believed that beauty wasn't just a matter of personal taste, but something more universal and objective.
Really? So you're saying there's actually a right answer when it comes to art?
Yeah.
Like one painting is objectively more beautiful than another?
It's not quite that simple, but Kant did argue that true beauty pleases us in a way that doesn't involve personal gain or practical use. It's a disinterested pleasure, a pure appreciation of form and harmony.
Okay, I need an example. This is getting a little too abstract for me.
Think about gazing up at a starry night sky. It's breathtakingly beautiful, but it's not useful in any practical sense. It doesn't provide food or shelter or anything like that, but it inspires awe and wonder, a sense of the sublime. That for Kant is a sign of true beauty. Or consider a piece of music that moves you deeply, even though it doesn't serve any practical purpose.
I get it. There's something about experiencing those things, a starry night, a beautiful piece of music that feels almost transcendent, like it taps into something deeper, something beyond our everyday concerns and worries.
Exactly. And for Kant, that feeling points to something fundamental about how our minds work. He believed that beauty is tied to the structure of our minds, the way our imagination and understanding interact. And because we all share this basic mental structure, beauty can be universal, something that connects people across cultures and time periods.
So it's not just about, I like this painting or I hate that song. It's about how our minds are wired to perceive and appreciate beauty. And since we're all human with those same basic mental structures, there's a kind of universal beauty out there that we can all tap into. That's a pretty amazing thought. It makes art feel so much more powerful.
It does, doesn't it? It suggests that art isn't just about personal preference, but about connecting with something larger than ourselves, something that speaks to our shared humanity.
This has been so insightful. We've covered so much ground from how our minds shape our perception of reality to the nature of ethics and freedom and even beauty. It's clear that Kant was a deep thinker grappling with fundamental questions that are still relevant today. But why does Kant still matter centuries after he lived? What's his legacy?
That's the key question, isn't it? And the answer is he matters because his ideas continue to shape how we understand ourselves and the world around us. His work influences modern science, ethics, and even politics. He challenges us to think critically, to question our assumptions, and to strive to be better, more ethical human beings.
So it's not just about dusty old books and abstract theories. Kant's ideas have real-world implications.
Absolutely. Let's dive into some specific examples of how his legacy lives on today.
Okay, I'm ready to hear about how Kant is still influencing us today. It's hard to imagine that a philosopher who lived centuries ago could still be relevant to our modern world, but I'm all ears.
Well, for starters, Kant's work on how our minds shape perception has had a huge impact on modern science, particularly in fields like cognitive psychology and neuroscience.
So even scientists are looking at Kant for inspiration.
Absolutely. His ideas helped pave the way for understanding how our brains construct our experience of the world. We don't just passively receive information. We actively interpret and organize it through those tinted glasses we talked about earlier. Our minds create the reality we perceive.
That's pretty amazing. It makes you realize just how subjective our experience of the world really is. No wonder we have so much trouble agreeing on what's true sometimes.
Exactly. And it highlights the importance of critical thinking, which was so central to Kant's philosophy. We need to be aware of our own biases, our own tinted glasses, and how they might be shaping our understanding of the world.
Okay, that makes sense for science.
Mm.
But what about ethics? How do Kant's ideas play out in the moral dilemmas we face today?
Well, his emphasis on universal moral principles and treating people as ends in themselves has been incredibly influential in the development of human rights.
You're talking about things like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Precisely. The very idea that every human being has inherent dignity and deserves respect, regardless of their race, religion, gender, or any other factor, is deeply rooted in Kantian ethics.
So when we talk about equality and justice, we're essentially echoing ideas that Kant articulated centuries ago.
In many ways, yes. His work provided a strong philosophical foundation for these values that we hold so dear today.
That's incredible. It makes you realize how much of an impact a single philosopher can have on the world.
It really does. And his influence extends even further into the realm of politics. Kant's idea of autonomy, that true freedom comes from following moral laws we set for ourselves, has been hugely influential in democratic thought.
So self-government, the idea that people should have a say in how they are ruled, has Kantian roots.
Absolutely. The very notion that individuals should be free to make their own choices as long as those choices don't infringe on the freedom of others is very much in line with Kant's thinking.
Wow, I never realized how far-reaching Kant's influence really is. Like his ideas are woven into the very fabric of modern society.
They are. And in our current age, where we're bombarded with information from all sides, Kant's emphasis on reason and critical thinking is more important than ever.
Right. We need to be able to sift through all the noise, evaluate information critically, and make sound judgments based on evidence and logic, not just emotion or blind faith.
Exactly. Kant reminds us that we have a responsibility to use our reason to think for ourselves and to challenge ideas that don't hold up to scrutiny.
It sounds like Kant was basically saying, don't be a sheep, think for yourself.
You could put it that way,
Mhm.
but it's more than just thinking for yourself. It's about thinking critically, using reason and logic to arrive at well-informed judgments. It's about recognizing our own biases and being open to different perspectives.
I think that's something we could all benefit from, especially in today's world.
I agree. And it's a testament to Kant's enduring relevance that his ideas still resonate so strongly today, centuries after he lived.
Well, this has been a truly eye-opening deep dive into the world of Immanuel Kant. Who knew that exploring the ideas of a philosopher from the 1700s could be so fascinating and relevant to our lives today?
It's amazing, isn't it? It just goes to show that the big questions about the human experience, about knowledge, morality, freedom, and beauty are timeless. And philosophers like Kant provide us with valuable tools for grappling with these questions.
As we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with something to ponder. We've talked about so many different facets of Kant's philosophy, but what's one Kantian idea that you think someone listening could apply in their own life? Maybe in how they make decisions, interact with others, or even just think about the world?
That's a great question to reflect on. Kant's work is so rich and thought-provoking. There's something in it for everyone. And remember, the journey of learning and discovery never truly ends. There's always more to explore, more to understand.
So stay curious, keep questioning, and keep those tinted glasses in check. Who knows? Maybe we'll see you on our next deep dive into the minds of brilliant thinkers. There's a whole universe of knowledge out there waiting to be discovered.